Hi, Aziz. Thank you for joining us.
How's it going?
Good. Everything's going good for us. We're so excited that you came and were a speaker here so we could talk to you. I've been watching you for a long time.
That's great. That's wonderful. It's great to talk to you guys too. It's really fun.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you when I saw you, I watched a couple of your remote views that you had done early on, and they stayed with me. Like, they're the stories when I tell people if I know anything about remote view, it's always your stories that kind of are the ones that I lean on. And one of the ones that I really wanted to always ask you about was you had talked about going to Venus.
Oh, yes, I did.
And
Okay.
that one, I believe you were saying that at that time at Farsight Institute, which is your father is the founder of.
Yeah.
You talked about how when you guys would do remote view, you would kind of brighten yourself up so that you could be seen.
Light up procedures. I remember that.
Yeah. And you were saying that the woman that was there that saw you when you did that, she kind of was like, yay.
Yeah. Oh, that was definitely a really exciting experience. She had kind of, I think I remember she had kind of like a military vibe, but she didn't feel like a military person, like the way I would actually think of a military person. But yeah, that was, I've noticed that with, I guess what I would subjectively call a positive being, if in my own personal interpretation of that term, I would say that, they're kind of like cheerleaders. They're kind of like happy that, you're like, oh, this person's, they're doing something. They're interacting in whatever way. So I was very happy when I saw that as well. So
yeah, that was kind of interesting. And so when you were there, that was all inside of the planet, correct?
yeah, it was kind of like it was kind of like a base that I remember. It was like I assume it was like an underground type of thing that was going deep into the crust. Cause I mean, like, you can't stay on the surface, at least from our conventional understanding of Venus, that you can't, like, it's not hospitable on the surface. I've heard other people talk about how there's, cities in the cloud, cause there's like a habitable zone that's like in the upper atmosphere of Venus. I've never actually done any remote viewing sessions on that part of the planet. We've actually only gone back there in one project, as far as I can remember off the top of my head. So I do feel like there's a lot of stuff that I would like to explore, because there's definitely sentient, intelligent species that is inhabiting that planet in whatever environments that they've knocked out for themselves. So it's a cool place. Definitely.
Yeah. Did you see different types of species to remember?
I only remember off the top of my head ones that looked more or less human-ish, like they had the human-ish look. I feel like they could walk around with us. Maybe they look slightly odd, but it was more or less they could blend in, sort of.
Yeah.
But, I mean, fashion choices were a little different. I felt like they had, like, at least the male subject I remember had long hair and was very straight. And it's I mean, people dress like that here, but it's just still it's unique. The styles were kind of unique. So
Yeah.
it was interesting.
That is interesting. And one of the other things that I remember that you were talking about in another session that you had was you said that whenever you met with people, when you had them in front of you, you always tried to ask them questions about kind of like our differences, or you would say, do you guys, I don't know, you would ask different questions about stuff. Does anything stand out that they told you that you weren't expecting?
I don't remember one specifically about the Venus session, but there is a question that I asked that really has just stuck with me for the longest time, and it was in the domain project, I remember. But the situation was, I remember I was asking something along the lines of if they considered evolution to be more of a biological or technological type of thing, or if their advancement of their abilities was more biological or technological. And the response I got, it was sort of like a chuckling, downplaying, almost jeering energy that was saying that I was, that question in and of itself was kind of a sign of my own ignorance. And it was almost like he was saying that they didn't really distinguish between the two, at least this group did. And they saw both as sort of tools that, applied correctly, can accelerate the development of one's abilities. And to distinguish between them, given my frame of reference at the time, if I was going to sort of put down on my older self and the way that I was thinking before, it sort of seems like I was considering the more natural, organic path to development along the lines of a religious superstition, or sort of imagining that this is something that, I'm not saying that you can't just do things organically or just with the body you have and nothing else, but my approach to it was almost in an anti-technological sense in the intention that I had during the conversation, that I sort of, I didn't really have a nuanced approach to the ideas of the applications of technology. And I didn't ever really think about other stuff like the idea of a computing device being something that doesn't hold the same digital hard mineral construct that our computing devices like our phones and our stuff like that sort of seem to hold. And I mean, there's been articles and stuff like that about biological computers and stuff like that. But it's great though, seeing that there's a more nuanced approach to the official, or not the official, but the way that a lot of these beings who are very psychic, very technologically advanced, and also very awake, so to speak, they look at the development of their selves as, we're going to use what works. And that was the attitude I sort of picked up there. And it was kind of liberating for me to sort of see it that way. And I'm not saying I want to get my head full of brain chips or anything like that, but I was less apprehensive towards other sides of my own society after that session. So it was, I like to say it made me a better person in a sense, but.
Yeah, I would think that it would, because it's kind of just broadening your, I don't know, view of what's possible and what we can do, instead of, deciding that one of them is good and one of them isn't. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's an interesting thought process. I remember too that one time you were talking about, I think you were interacting with a reptilian, and you were saying in that, I believe you were saying that they felt that I think our phone devices were something that was meant to kind of distract us, and us not being able to meditate and concentrate was kind of to their benefit. Can you talk about that a little?
I remember that session. He laughed at me. And he was saying you're too agitated and we made you that way. And it was really, really interesting because I really loved the interaction. I mean, I really didn't take offense to it, but it was, when that sort of thing happened, the idea of agitation as an obstacle, just the general concept of agitation, that was completely new to me to see it that way. Because of the idea that, like, okay, so we're going to make you agitated. And then, like, when I think about my own meditation sessions, everyone's sort of concerned with the idea of, like, okay, I got to quiet my mind, which I actually have a different opinion about about that verbiage. I don't think that we're supposed to quiet it. I think we're supposed to widen our scope so that the train of thought doesn't actually end. This is actually part of the presentation. The train of thought doesn't actually end up seeming so pronounced. But if you're really agitated, you end up having this very narrow focus of scope. And then when your awareness's scope of focus is so narrow, it's so drilled in on the brain doing what it's supposed to do, which is having this like logic loop going on, it sort of translates into this agitation, this baseline agitation, because it's all you're aware of and you're identifying with it. And think about it, there's so many mental issues that people can get into because they're having a thought. They immediately identify that as some reflexive thing that is like indicative of themselves. And then they say like, well, now I'm stressed, because now their next thought is basically taking in that previous thought and then working it through the function of their matrix of a personality and then creating a new thought. And then it becomes this whole big train. And it's like, and it's the agitation is contagious. And having a whole bunch of other stuff like our devices and televisions and stuff like that, I'm not saying that those things are bad in and of themselves, but the way that they've been utilized have been in a way that it sort of exalts the unconscious state. And when you exalt the unconscious state, you're basically telling yourself, okay, I'm an awareness, I'm going to sit back, this is a movie, but I'm going to identify with it. And that's crazy, because if you identify with the movie, then you watch somebody like a Hollywood actor and they stub their toe and then you say, ouch. And that's weird. And so I definitely think that the concept of we are too agitated is really, really a vital thing that we as a species have to get out of. But I also think our approach to it isn't to look at the agitation and quash it. Our approach to it needs to be, okay, we have to ground ourselves in what we actually are, which is an awareness, not the brain, not the emotions, not the thoughts. It's an awareness. And as an awareness, if we widen our scope of focus, then we're aware of so much more. And when we're aware of so much more, the thought train that sort of, if we're focused only on that becomes agitation, we're not dialed in on it as much. And then the waters of our mind seem a lot cleaner and calmer, and the mind naturally almost quiets itself at that point because you're looking at a wider perspective. So.
It's almost a gift, you getting to have that conversation with him, because it gave you a different perspective. On that. Okay. Sorry. It gave you a different perspective on what it was that you were. And did it change, you think, the way that you did your, remote views, or the way that you?
If you want to say that question again, because
yeah.
It's because of the door, because of the sound. I don't know what the sound actually is going to.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. No, I was just saying that, you getting that, having that interaction with that reptilian was kind of a gift.
It was a gift.
Yeah, because you got to kind of, he almost helped you in a way when he was kind of
making fun.
Cheering you and stuff. But do you find that, do you think that it changed the way that you remote view now, or the way that you kind of move through that process?
I've taken a big approach to sort of seeing the world as kind of like a predator-prey relationship instead of a good and evil relationship. I'm not perfect at it. I mean, obviously there are things that are so averse to me that I'm like, that's evil, so, and I feel like everyone could sort of empathize with that. But the idea of giving that dichotomy of like good versus evil, I'm trying to switch it out for something that I can actually work with, because the ideas of good and evil, you can't really, at least I don't feel like that. And I'm speaking very subjectively here. Other people can have different opinions, but when I think of the idea of good and evil, I sort of think to myself, that's understandable, but I don't know how I can practically deal with it. I always think that, okay, I just want to be on the good side. And that's just the end of the argument. It's not really very malleable. I can't really like grab my hands around a concept and make something. But if I think of something in the sense of predator-prey, then I think, okay, well, the difference between predator and prey isn't necessarily what you eat. I mean, if you're an animal, it becomes that, but it becomes the subjective motion of assets of reality that depends on power. And it's like whoever has the most amount of power is actually able to move. And then the idea of prey is the person who is being moved, and the idea of predator is the person who's doing the moving. And so the only thing that you have to ask yourself then is, okay, well, I want to have more power. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be a carnivore or anything like that, because an elephant has a lot of power and it doesn't need anybody. And a rhino has a lot of power and it doesn't need anybody. But a lion also has a lot of power and it will eat somebody. But the idea, if you bring it up to a sentient level of existence, and we think that, okay, well, what are the pillars of power for something who's not just looking for food? Then we have to say, okay, I think there's three. And the three pillars of power that I would say that are the most common in the human experience would be the capacity for violence. That's something that we get from the animal level. And it still exists in our 3D human world. The capacity for violence and which can turn into coercion and stuff like that. But the second pillar of power is a little bit more nuanced. It's the economy. And it doesn't just mean money. It just means the ability to move assets through space. And that can be the ability to move people. That can be the ability to move objects. But money is the 3D lubricant for what makes that type of thing happen. So if those two things are these two big pillars of power, the third one would be your psychic abilities. The third one would be your psionic senses, anything that takes a nonlinear approach to the manipulation of 3D space or the observation of 3D space. And it's almost like a cheat code, because it kind of like circumvents all the barriers that would typically be subjected to the first two pillars of power, which is why I think it's probably the most powerful one. And I think it's the one that's going to lead us to another level of existence. But then, anyway, going back to the reptilian thing, I was looking at his insult to sort of be like him sort of jeering me in the sense of, okay, we have the power in this perspective by putting all of this stuff in your ethos. And if I wanted to get out of that, my response now, if I didn't see him as evil, if I just saw him in this predator-prey relationship, my response was, okay, I just need to get more power. And when I had this quest for power, I immediately thought, okay, well, I had my hands on the wheel now. I can do something about it. So then I started to meditate a lot longer. I started to try to take my remote viewing sessions a lot more serious in the sense of doing personal sessions outside of remote viewing with Farsight that would be just like for personal projects and stuff like that, because I was hungry. I wanted practice. I wanted to exercise the muscle. It's almost like if you want to get big and you go to the gym, you have all the ideas in your mind about like, oh, I can't wait to be bigger, stronger, faster, better. But if you add that to like, if you're dealing with a psychic arena, or if you're dealing with the awakening process in general, then you start doing exercises that are indicative of those types of things. So I guess a longer meditation session, looking into different types of meditation sessions. I started doing all this deep dives into the Tibetan Buddhism and Taoism and stuff. So yeah, that's the answer to the question. I was influenced by that sort of approach to things. So
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's funny. Do you find you hear a lot of stories now that people say, all of that's cleared out and it's not really around anymore. Do you find that you're still seeing pockets of these beings that are in and around?
I don't believe anything's cleared out. I sort of think I definitely think things are better. Like that's objectively, like you just look at situations like like Philip Schneider is a guy who he was quite big into disclosing negative things going on in underground bases, and he was killed. And we're talking about, just at this conference right now, people are talking about much more sensitive things with a lot more detail, and we're all alive and we're all, doing pretty well. So I actually think that we're all, the earth is objectively a better, more awakened place. So the idea of clearing things out, I'll give it like a 15% thing.
Okay.
But I don't think that the idea of the predator-prey construct has been omitted from the planet. I think that and I could be wrong. I'm not saying that I'm 100% right on everything, but my personal experience, my personal subjective opinion, to answer the question as honestly as I can, is that we live in a jungle. The law of the jungle is the law, and civilization can kind of make us sort of forget that. And it's good. I like civilization. I enjoy eating food and watching Netflix and stuff like that. I enjoy the comforts of life, but I don't think we're completely removed from such things. And I think the idea of a predator-prey existence is so nuanced to the fact that the idea of making somebody think that there is less to do or less urgency is something that I'm wary of. And I could just be pessimistic. Honestly, I could just, I'm not saying I'm not official anything on anything, but that's my subjective opinion. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, it's good to be kind of aware that there are all kinds of opinions about these things, and using your own discernment is so important. Just to kind of come up with that really quickly too. I just have a couple more questions. I wanted to ask you about, you guys remote viewed, and looked at, Jesus.
Yeah.
When he was, you were looking specifically for the last days that, like, leading up to was he actually crucified or was he not? And then you guys also looked at Lucifer.
Yeah.
And you looked at you looked at Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
Well, on those types of things that were, big in history and things, was there anything that came out of that you found to be, I don't know, the most shocking, or, it all was. I was sitting there watching these things with my mouth open, but was there anything that you felt like it changed your perspective? Because I'm sure your perspective is going to be different than most people.
Zeus, that project was the most impactful. It was, honestly, I've never had a more disgusting subject that I've ever had to remote view than Zeus. But then I realized that when you look at the classical Greek myths, they're not really like these romantic tales. They're just criminal history reports. They're just like, because that guy was just a rapist. He was just going around like doing all this horrible stuff to people. And it's like, he had this like, position in this like, it was a bunch of, across a bunch of different cultures. Around that time period, it seems that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there were a significant amount of extraterrestrial beings, many of which who looked human, who were in these positions of power because they were attached to an extraterrestrial civilization. And they had control over the planet, or a section of the planet. So it's like the Egyptian pantheon and the Greek pantheon, and those guys were markedly different than what was going on in India and in that part of the region of the world. And then we had the War in Heaven project, which showed that there is credence to the tales of a battle between those two pantheons. So that they basically, well, we assumed those two pantheons based on our remote viewing data, but it's that type of stuff. I mean, when I saw the Zeus version of it, and I guess the reason why that one was so impactful to me was because, you know, when you're in a remote viewing session, you can be very empathetic. You're sort of blended into the awareness and the sensory perceptions of the subjects that you're remote viewing, and you never want to see somebody get assaulted. And when you see that type of thing, and then you sort of feel it as it's happening, and then I'm remote viewing Zeus, and then Zeus is like, "Don't look at me." Like, he knows this is like not something that is like the most honorable thing, like deep down, and he's just like sort of walking around like, I call him Jeffrey Epstein in a spaceship, because that's like what the guy really was. And it's anyway, it's
that was a crazy one.
It was a crazy one, but it's the Noah's Ark one was funny though. I thought that one was hilarious because
you did,
yeah, because it's like it almost seemed like there was like a spaceship, like a big spaceship that was underwater, and then a little part of it stuck out, and they had like wood like on the side of it just for the part that stuck out, and I was, at least that's the way I saw it, and it's just like, this is comical, like this is hilarious. And then there's these like big long-headed beings who had this like, poor little Noah is just sort of sitting wide-eyed, just being like, oh my god. Like, he's having this whole experience with those guys. I thought that was a really funny session, but it was cool. I mean, I'd say still also it was nice to see that session. And then later on after that session, I started doing a bunch of effort looking into long-headed, like accounts for long-headed, cone-headed beings and stuff like that. And that was, I didn't know as much about them until after the session. So once I learned more about them, I was just like, oh, it's cool to learn these guys are a part of the story. They're out here, they're doing this stuff. So
I think, I just have one more question that I wanted to ask you about beings that you ran into. And then my last question was just going to be, kind of personal for you. I mean, not really personal, but you talked one time about, you were remote viewing, and I think you were out here in the Southwest somewhere, and you saw a female being that was kind of being held against her will, and she kind of reached out to you. And she was kind of trying to see if there was anything you could do. Do you remember that?
I remember two examples of similar stuff.
Okay.
I remember that happened with a mantis being on Mars, and that's not a lady, obviously, but that one did reach out and for help, and I just sort of projected me on the couch and just not being on the planet, and then I just got a sort of a dejected downward emotion, and then I felt kind of bad about that. But then also I found out from a lot of other SSP whistleblower people that there is this sort of like thing where they're like arresting these mantis looking like I don't know if I called it a mantis at the time, but it was like an insect looking subject, and it was being arrested by a human looking subject in a military uniform, a dark one, as well as these two reptilian-looking subjects who had these like weapons of sort. And he wasn't very happy at the moment. But anyway, he was being like ushered into a non-surface structure by those people. But I do kind of remember going along the lines of what you were saying. And I apologize if I don't remember the exact one. But
there's so many.
Yeah, there's a lot. But one of the ones that was interesting was there was this lady, and I remember she was being sold this lie, basically, but she had a lot of bubbly emotions going into this non-surface structure experience with a non-human being like led out to the middle of this open barren landscape. Kind of makes me think of the Southwest, maybe, if that was the area of the target. But I remember I tuned into her after she was sort of taken up on the spaceship, and she was very much not happy. She was in this sort of slavery position, and she was I don't know, she just wasn't really having a good time. So it was that's what came to my mind when you mentioned that story. And she was, I don't remember if she exactly asked for help, but I do remember she wasn't having a good time.
Yeah.
So,
how do you reconcile those kind of things? Can you kind of set it aside and do that? Does it stay with you? Do you ever go back and look at them again later? Or
well, I try to be as robotic as I can be, because I kind of try to see it as like the next level up of watching like David Attenborough documentaries with Planet Earth and stuff like that, because I'm trying to learn about existence and creation and stuff like that, because I am a part of it. I want to move through it with more knowledge in my head. And the issue though is, well, if I was going to see it in this like objective sense, my emotionality, I try not to let it have too much domination in that sort of space. But which you might have even picked it up with when I was talking about the Zeus session. I'm not a robot. I'm not completely a robot. I can't really block out the emotionality altogether. I mean, there are definitely sessions that I'm just sort of like, that was traumatizing to see that type of thing. So I'm not like completely omitted from it, but I do try to see it as nature. I'm looking at nature. And the more I accept that that is nature, that is the raw, natural law of the jungle experience that happens across all these spaces that are outside of my nice little bubble of having just a regular human existence by my own standards, then I feel like I'm a stronger person. At least I like to believe that I'm a stronger person in making my decisions, and hopefully being more compassionate than a timeline where I wasn't doing this type of stuff. So that's my hope. I don't know.
Yeah.
Glass half full.
Makes sense. Makes sense. My last question before I let you go is that, were you always, when your dad was doing this, when you were younger, did you always know that you would find yourself in this space too, or did that develop for you? How did that happen?
No, I was kind of reluctantly dragged into it because when I was growing up, I thought that meditation was homework because I was raised in a Catholic household, and I went to Catholic school for middle school and high school, and my mom's really Catholic. So then anyway, my mom was also really into transcendental meditation. Both my parents are. My dad and my mom were really into transcendental meditation. And my mom made sure that I was doing TM from 10 years old. And I thought it was homework. I did not like doing meditation. I was just, she would tell me to meditate and I'd just be like, eh. But then as I kept doing it, it wasn't until I started thinking that it was more of a fun thing. And it was YouTube that actually helped me out with that. Actually, Rion, he is speaking at the moment, his YouTube channel was what made me sort of start to think like, oh, this could be fun. Because I was watching it, I was 18 or 17 at the time, and I was thinking to myself, like, I've never taken that approach. I never thought to myself, like, let's go meditate and like connect with these other worlds. So then I decided to start doing attempts to do astral projection. I started cutting up ping pong balls to do Ganzfeld experiments and stuff like that. And I started to see things that I was thinking to myself, like, oh, that was like, undeniably, I experienced seeing something in the blackness of my eyelids that was like a vision type of thing. And I can't deny it. You know, in this moment, I'm completely like a sober person in this time, and I'm meditating and I'm experiencing a thing. I'm seeing a thing. And then I started to think to myself, all right, there's something here. I should explore this a little bit more. But I still didn't take it that seriously. And my dad didn't want me to do remote viewing at the time as well, because he wanted me to sort of blend in with the rest of my existence of, being able to socialize with my peers at school, and being able to just do stuff along those lines that were, conducive to a normal human existence. So, and also he didn't want me to get distracted from school. Like, he didn't want me to find out about remote viewing, invest a whole bunch of myself into it, and then not care about math class. Like I was supposed to. He wanted me to do regular school stuff. And then afterwards, I went and I started teaching English in China. I was a kindergarten teacher, and I still hadn't done remote viewing. And I was 23, and then he made a deal with me. He said, come back, let me teach you remote viewing. I don't care what you do with your life after that. And well, he didn't say it like that, but he's like, you can do whatever you want after that. And then after that, I learned remote viewing, and then I just stuck with it. I just kept on wanting to do it. I still ended up having, like, I taught English to middle schoolers for a while I was doing remote viewing at the time. But it's I was sort of, I had to be convinced of it. So it wasn't really something I gravitated towards too organically. It was sort of something I had to have, my parents sort of threw it in front of me a lot. And I'm glad I took their advice. I'm glad I listened eventually. So.
I'm glad you did too.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for this. This was fascinating.
Thank you.
These are questions I've wanted to ask you since I started watching it years ago, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah.